Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan on 105.5 FM and 1390 AM in Washington, D.C. We have with us now former CIA case officer and Army intelligence officer Phil Giraldi. Phil, welcome to Fault Lines.
Well, thank you for having me on again.
Oh, thank you for coming on. You know, I saw an article that you have out about the Epstein network and its connections to the Mossad, and I did a great article. I wanted you to come on and fill our listeners in and talk a bit about the premise and about what you found in your research.
Well, I mean, the truly interesting thing is that, when Epstein was first prosecuted down in Florida, the federal prosecutor, Mr. Acosta, basically said that he had been told to back off because Epstein was intelligence. And as far as I can tell, this has not been followed up by anyone. It would just require a simple question to go to Acosta and say, what did you mean by intelligence, and who told you to back off, and how did they explain it? I mean, a real simple kind of, sequence of questions, and nobody's asking it. So I started digging into it. Most of my former colleagues in the CIA, when they read the account of what Epstein was doing with the filming of people coming into his house and having sex with underage girls and so on, it immediately occurred to us this was an intelligence operation. This is not just your normal pervert doing this kind of stuff. There was big money behind it. There was high technology behind it. And there was a ton of blackmail information that came out of it. So we started thinking about it, and it occurred to me that most of the connections that Epstein had that would suggest an intelligence connection were Israelis. And many of the targets in his mansion and other places were high-profile Americans, which the Israeli government would really like to get on their side. So it fit together in terms of what the targets were, and it fit together in what the profile of Epstein was.
Well, let me. A friend of mine made this point, and I think there's something to it. Let's go with let's say he's not connected to intelligence. Let's just play this scenario through. Okay, Phil? He's not connected to intelligence. He's a wealthy pervert who was blackmailing high-profile politicians, possibly presidents. Okay? If he's not intelligence, that would have been investigated. Does that make sense? If the guy's just rich and he's blackmailing politicians, you'd think the politicians would be the first one to go, wait a minute, this guy needs to be shut down and investigated for that. I have seen not one single investigation about him. And by the way, he bragged to the girls. This came out in 2006. He was bragging about blackmailing people. This was in the investigation. They knew about it in 2007 and 2008 when they made the deal with him, that he had bragged about it. Furthermore, I have not seen any investigation of people like, why hasn't Bill Richardson been called in? He's been accused of having sex with these girls. Why hasn't Prince Andrew been called in? Why hasn't the U.S. made a big deal of bringing this guy in? Why hasn't Alan Dershowitz been called in? So to me, this is, what Sherlock Holmes referred to. I think it was actually Arthur Conan Doyle. Sherlock Holmes, if I think about it, it's a fictional character. But he had a story called The Dog That Didn't Bark. And that seems to me to be the dog that didn't bark here, Phil, is that where's the investigation of these aspects?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I would throw into that mix his procurer, Ghislaine Maxwell, who also had Israeli connections. And there are other big questions that come out immediately that any kind of basic investigation should have surfaced answers for. Like, for example, this guy, his estate when he died was $550 million. Where did the money come from? Money leaves a trail. And if he was blackmailing people, that would show. And if he was getting money from the Israeli government or from the CIA or from the Russians or from anybody you want to, name, that would show. It'd be demonstrable. And then he also, you might recall, had what they keep describing as a phony Austrian passport. Now, I've been trying to get information on that because what does a phony passport mean? I believe it was a real Austrian passport that was in a fake name that he was using and with his picture in it. Now, was that just a passport somebody stole on the street, or was that a passport that was actually procured somehow in Austria? And one would point out, or might point out, that Ambassador Ron Lauder, who was the U.S. ambassador to Austria at that time, is a major aggressive defender of Israel. So, the passport shows up. I mean, there are so many things, and the money, and again, who said this guy was intelligence? How did he say it? No answers are coming out on any of this.
Well, you brought up a guy, a billionaire, Arnold Milchan or Milken. Talk about how his story kind of relates to Epstein.
Well, basically, it's another case where someone was pretty much spying for Israel right out in the open and was essentially untouchable. This guy, Arnold Milchan, was the one who, among other things, procured the nuclear triggers that enabled, this was done in California, in Hollywood, the nuclear triggers that enabled people to take uranium and turn it into a bomb. And he was the guy that did that. And of course, this was completely illegal. This was technology that was sanctioned, that was not supposed to be sold to anyone. And he did that, among other things. And meanwhile, he's producing movie after movie in Hollywood and making billions of dollars. And nobody is even interviewing him, even though this was all done in the open and everybody knew about it. This is the Israel exemption when it comes to investigating crimes against the United States. If you talk to an FBI guy who works in counterintelligence for FBI, they'll tell you there are hundreds of Israeli intelligence agents operating in the United States all the time, and the FBI knows who they are, but the Justice Department will never let them go after them.
Well, so what is this? When you talk about, let's talk about the CIA's relation, and talk about what you can talk about. What is the CIA's relationship with Israel? Because I know that going back, for instance, to the beginning of the agency, people like James Jesus Angleton, who was the head of counterintelligence at the CIA for many years, was tricked by the Kim Philby thing. But there's like 3 memorials to him in Israel. After Angleton died, there's like 3 memorials. And it seems like the theft of the nuclear materials that Israel used in the Dimona plant to make the bomb happened under Angleton's watch. I'm not saying he enabled it. I'm saying it seems like he looked the other way from everything I've seen. So Phil, what can you tell us from your experience in the CIA about the relationship between the CIA, Israel, and Mossad?
Well, the simple answer is that Angleton was a one-off. He was a rogue guy who saw his career and he saw his personal interests as being involved with developing a close relationship with Israel. But I can assure you, at the working level of the CIA people hate the Israelis, hate Mossad, because Mossad is constantly going rogue itself, doing things that are crazy, and it also floods the U.S. intelligence system with a lot of phony reports, phony intelligence that is intended to denigrate Iranians, Arabs, all of the enemies du jour of Israel. And this has been an ongoing practice for 50 years. And so there is no warm feeling between the two agencies, and the idea that Mossad is a function of CIA or vice versa is just not true.
Now, okay, let's talk about one specific person, though, James Woolsey, the former director of the CIA. He's on the board of this company, Genie Energy. He also, Garland, I don't know if you know this, Woolsey's one of the big guys who's pushing the People's Mujahideen, the MEK, that Marxist jihadist cult that people want. So where does a guy like Woolsey fit into this? Because he's on the board of this company, Genie Energy, that has the exclusive drilling rights to the oil under the Golan Heights. Because he's connected to the MEK, that is also an Israeli maneuver, because the MEK is backed by Israel as well. So where do you see a guy like Woolsey fitting into things?
Well, bear in mind mind that Woolsey was not a career intelligence officer. He came over from the military. He was appointed by Bill Clinton. He was only in his office for 1 year as director, and Clinton never even met with him. So this was a kind of an oddball guy, an oddball situation, and Woolsey has indeed been a big proponent of Israel and Israeli interests because it serves his purposes, to do so. And I'll also add that if you want to get a broader picture of Woolsey, this is a guy that at several points has been talking about being visited by Martians. So it's this guy is, again, he's not from the norm. He's not out of the intelligence community. This guy was an oddball who was inserted by an insecure Bill Clinton, and he is what he is.
Well, Phil, you've been around the intel community for a while, having worked for the CIA. It's an interesting time to me. It seems to me that Israel's influence in U.S. politics is being questioned more so than ever, and that the Epstein case, when there's a lot of discussion, I've never seen the level of discussion that I'm seeing now with some of the people challenging the conventional tropes. And it seems like that the Epstein case comes at a very bad time for the Israeli neocons, wherein there's a lot of questioning going on, and there's this building movement of independent journalists and investigative journalists on the online who they're fighting with censorship. What do you think about what's going on now regarding the questions of the non-traditional question of Israel? Do you think that's related to the growth of an independent journalistic movement online?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think those two movements kind of have grown together, and the fact that the Israeli problem is now out of the box, is significant. I think that there's been open discussion of the relationship with Israel and how it does not benefit the United States going on for some time now. The problem with this is, of course, it's alternative guys like kind of me and you and some others who are really looking at these issues. Mainstream media is making this story go away, doing their best to make the Epstein story go away. And that's what one would expect from the deep state. One would expect that from the establishment. And, of course, the establishment is tied closely to Israeli interests. So that's what we're seeing.
Let me ask you this. There's three. So I'm going to throw out something there for the conspiracy theorists and just get what you think about it. I see three big investigations going on right now, and people having a lot of problems because of them. Number one, you've got the whole Trump impeachment thing going on with the resistance, which in my opinion is a bunch of garbage, but it's a pain in the neck apparently for the Trump people. You've got an investigation into the beginnings of Russiagate, which God knows you and I both know the intelligence community can't afford for that to continue. And then you've got the Maxwell investigation, which the intelligence community can't afford for that to continue. It's, in my experience, and I think there's some deals to be made here. I think there's a bunch of people here. Now, while the journalists online, the independent journalists aren't going to let it go, I think they'll be looking to make some deals where everybody gets the other guy's investigation that's going to hurt him closed down. And they're like, I tell you what, you don't look into this. We won't look into impeachment. We won't look into Russiagate. What do you think about that? Am I crazy and conspiratorial in thinking that that's a possibility?
Well, I think, we've got an election year coming up, and I think a lot of these issues are going to be exploited by one party or the other in terms of how they spin it, or both simultaneously. And I think a lot of these issues are going to come to the surface again, and I think there are going to be a lot of deals made by, let's face it, at the top of the Republican Party, top of the Democratic Party, this is all the establishment. These are all the people who kind of basically see everything the same way, and they see it in a way that benefits themselves. And they're going to be looking at how we trim this, how we shape this, and everything like that. And I think they're going to have to come to terms with a lot of stuff is out there, and it's going to come up whether they want it to come up or not. So it'll be an interesting year, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, let me ask you, you talked about the CIA's relationship with Israel. Now, one of the things, though, I think when people talk about this is, as you point out, Alex Acosta was told that back off Epstein's intelligence. But people, I think, sometimes use this as an either or. Like, okay, well, he may have been a CIA asset or a Mossad asset. I mean, it seems to me like what may have happened with Epstein was here's a guy who was gathering this material for his kind of own purposes initially, like to build business, relationships or whatever, like to have blackmail on people to advance himself economically. But when you deal with that, is it possible, is entirely possible he was giving information to a number of intelligence agencies, whether it's UK, Israel, US?
Yeah. In fact, if he was following the example of Mr. Maxwell, the father of his procurer, that's exactly what he might have been doing. Maxwell was working for the Israelis, and it's been widely believed that he was also working for the Russians, and might have also been feeding information to the British. The guy was in business, and Epstein maybe the same sort of thing prevailed. He could have kept the CIA and the FBI off his back by feeding certain amounts of information to them, and he might have been doing the same thing with the Israelis, and he might have meanwhile been blackmailing people on the side to make money. This is not inconceivable.
Well, this guy, with all of the money, he's a alleged billionaire. His only business partner being known, Lex Wexner. What do you know? I don't know that much. What do you know about Lex Wexner?
Well, Wexner is the owner of Victoria's Secrets and other women's clothing companies located in Ohio. He's a multi-billionaire. He's, of course, Jewish. He was a member of a group called Mega. Mega was a group of Jewish billionaires, Jewish oligarchs who got together in the 60s with the expectation that they would be able to pressure the U.S. government and protect Israel. So this is one of the connections he has. Now, Wexner appears to be the only source of income, a legal source, or open, not even open, but the only source of identifiable income for Epstein. And so there's a great mystery there where the rest of the money came from, or to the extent to which Wexner was actually supporting Epstein for whatever purpose. And again, this is a question that would be relatively easy to answer, but nobody's asking it.
Right. My understanding is Epstein has no record of being a stock trader or Wall Street. That when you search the guy who dropped out of college, he doesn't have like a degree in business or something like that. That other than Wexner, there's nothing showing anywhere where this guy got his money. And
he was at Bear Stearns out of the Dalton School. He was picked up by Ace Greenberg at Bear Stearns. He was at Bear Stearns for a while. But again, he had no background to be there either. But you know what? Sometimes people do go into that business with no back. They learn trading or whatever. But it's the interesting thing about his exit from Bear Stearns is involved Edgar Bronfman, who's another part of that mega group that Phil was just talking about. Bronfman, of course, from the Seagram's liquor family. Hey, Phil, great appearance. Tell people where they can find your stuff. We're about out of time.
Okay, well, I post on Facebook under my name, and I also post regularly at unz.com. That's unz.com.
All right, Phil Giraldi, great Phil Giraldi. Thanks so much for joining us. Another great appearance. Garland, we are the show of record on the Jeffrey Epstein story. We will have Whitney Webb on, I believe, later in the week to talk about her
I can't wait.
Amazing new article. But we have the best journalists talking about this, and we know a thing or two ourselves. We got more coming up. Fault Lines.